Hello, and welcome to this episode of Results Not Typical. Nikki here. So I'm going to bring on Isabelle in just a moment. If you've followed the podcast for any amount of time, you probably know who she is by now. She's a friend and colleague of mine who is a strength and nutrition coach, and her background is in the brain and the nervous system, and sort of looking at how working with those parts of our body, which is really our whole system, impacts how we feel, how we move, pain, all those things. The conversation that we're going to get into is one that we recorded a little while ago. Actually, I just haven't gone around issuing it, but here we are, where we kind of talk about realistic expectations and body image, and how Instagram and the internet and phenomenons like the Kardashian butt in plastic surgery has really skewed how we view ourselves. And what it means to have realistic expectations for yourself. Within that, we get into some kind of interesting phenomenons in biology that don't just apply to humans, they apply to birds and all sorts of things about them. It's like the more exaggerated this thing, the more attracted we are to it, even when it's like really exaggerated. So we kind of talk a little bit about that too. I just want to let you know before we jump into this episode that depending on when you're listening to this, October 25th, through 29, 2021, Isabelle and I are running a 5-day free challenge. It's called the Troubleshoot Your Deadlift Challenge. And we are going to share some different exercises to troubleshoot back pain for yourself or your clients in deadlifts, as well as some exercises on how to do deadlifts more effectively to engage your glutes and hamstrings if you tend to feel your lower back a lot, and some different ways to work around any mobility limitations you have in an exercise like a deadlift, such as stiff ankles, hips, knees, stiff upper back, all of that. So if you are interested in joining us in that, I have put a link to this if you're watching it on YouTube in the YouTube description. I've also put in a link in the show notes. So wherever you watch this, you can find a link to sign up for that. Like I said, it's free. And also, if you're interested in learning more about kettlebells for yourself or primarily your clients, we will pick one person who participates to get free attendance to an upcoming workshop that we're teaching in November, going through troubleshooting all the different kettlebell exercises. So if you're interested in that, the links are everywhere for signing up. Just wherever you're listening to this or watching it, you can find it in the description or the show notes. So with that, let's get into this interview with Isabelle, and I hope you enjoy this one. This is Nikki Naab-Levy, and you are listening to Results Not Typical, a podcast that challenges the traditional narrative of fitness while tackling misinformation that is keeping you from reaching your fitness goals. Okay. Hi, everyone. Trying something a little bit differently. I'm not sure that was English, but it's fine. Basically, the podcast is now also on YouTube if you want to watch us talk. You're welcome. I'm sorry. It's all fine. Now you can see the facial expressions. I've got Isabelle with me, and we are going to talk about what I named the paradox of the Big Beak, even though that's not actually the thing that we're going to end up referring to. So basically, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of this like scientific idea of what occurs in nature with things being really, really exaggerated, how that may or may not, because this is very armchair psychology, pop psychology, carry over into how we view what is attractive and what bodies are supposed to look like in fitness, and how we're very confused about that aesthetic piece versus health. So welcome back, Isabelle. For
Hi.
people who aren't familiar with you, do you mind doing the quick and dirty intro, who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So hi, everybody. My name is Isabelle Barter. I also go by Stronger Human on social media. I am a strength coach, a movement person, and I have a little bit of a curiosity and background in applying neurology for athletic performance. So those are my main things. And excited to be back here again to chat about what is this term called? This term is called supranormal stimuli or supranormal stimulus. So
Yes. And what I love about this is that you'd heard about this, but you remembered it. I'm going to let you tell what it actually is. But you initially thought it was this idea of like, they kept putting bigger and bigger beaks on the bird.
Yeah,
It didn't matter.
You and I, Nikki, were in a conversation about looking at some of the attention grabbing myths that you see on Instagram or other social media platforms where people are trying to spout that they are the sources of health and wellness. And often what happens is people latch onto these ideas, but it's almost like it goes to this extreme. So anyway, our conversation turned into me inaccurately remembering a story that I'd heard somewhere. And the inaccurate version was that there were these birds, and the bigger the beak, the more the infant birds would try and feed from the mother. And so I thought that scientists were trying to set up for a bigger and bigger and bigger beak. And it correlated with like the bigger the beak, the more the infant tried to feed off of the mother. Turns out I had that wrong, but I didn't have the, what is it called again? Supranormal stimulus part of it wrong. So the correct story is of this type of bird that the bird species has a red dot on its beak. And the scientists found that the bigger the red dot was on the beak, the more the infants were trying to feed and tap on the mouth of the beak. So it was almost correct. The red dot on the beak to get the parents to feed it. And so the scientists found that they would use puppets, and the bigger the red dot, the more this pecking behavior was, the nestlings, the birdlings did this pecking behavior. And what ended up happening in their experiments, there was no threshold for when the young would stop this behavior. It was like comedic proportions, and the young were still trying to peck on this artificial red dot to get the food. So it just reminded both of us of what I think happens in our fitness and wellness, or wellness in quotation marks, culture, where we think the more we do a behavior, more exercise must be better, bigger butt must be better. To the extremes. And I wonder where the threshold is sometimes for some of this behavior.
Yeah. And I don't think I think that's what's so messed up. And I'm going to have you read that little like Wikipedia quote that you found, and I'll link to it in the show notes too, to the full article. But it is this idea, right, that especially with women, it's like, we're supposed to have these quite literally out of this world proportions, to the point that you have women. And again, this is no shade if like this is your preferred aesthetic, or if you're the person who's done this, but it's like the norm has become something that is completely unattainable without plastic surgery, where you see these like fit pro girls who've dieted down to extraordinarily low percentages of body fat, and they've put in 2 giant tits of like silicone. And it's like, the average and then we're like, well, that's fitness, that's health. And it's like, that's an aesthetic, and it's an aesthetic that a certain population is very attracted to, that maybe, again, we argue, is there such a thing as 2 big boobs? Apparently, I guess it depends who you ask, right? But it's like the thing that we're chasing isn't even possible anymore. And it's definitely not health.
And we often, the problem, I saw something that was really interesting that I think it was, I'm going to remember it wrong again, probably. It was Norway or some country in that region that was saying on their Instagram, I think they're trying to pass legislation that you have to actually put a disclaimer on photos that are photoshopping women, because the problem is people who aren't in the body space, I think, don't know what normal and not normal is, or don't know what natural versus unnatural is. And I'm like, hey, if you want to augment anything, augment away. Like if that's what feels better to you and makes you feel happier, go for it. The challenge is when I work with folks who are like, I want so-and-so's breast size and also to have no fat in the back of my tricep. And I'm like, usually those things don't go together. Or I want Kim Kardashian's butt, but the waistline that she also seems to have. And I'm like, I don't know if that is natural and achievable or not. And I'm not sure how to give that to your particular body. It's like, what is real and what is not real? And they're so blurred now that it's hard for people to know what's actually possible for them and what's healthy to do for them.
Yeah. And I think that when we add in these extra layers of confusion and nuance, and for some people, frustration, which is like genetics, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of genetics determines, like if someone came to me, because I have extraordinarily long, skinny legs, no matter what I do, and they were like, I want your legs, I'd be like, pick different parents, because right. But at the same time, because I have narrow hips that go with my narrow, long legs, if I was like, I want Kim Kardashian's hips and ass, I'd be screwed. There's no way. It's like, it's not possible for me. And so I think that there's also that piece. And then on top of it, there's like the whole curated photos thing, which is like those of us who are in the space who like need to come across as like, quote unquote, professionals, I'm not sure anyone considers me that these days, but we have our curated photos, and like, I don't think I've never like doctored my body in a photo, but I don't even look like my photo. You know what I mean? In real life.
It's that hard part of I think it is so challenging. If you've never had your own photos touched up, I think you and I were talking about this. If you never had it touched up, I don't think your sense of when you see photos out there in a magazine, I don't know if you know what you're looking at. Like lighting can do so much to change, even without touching up. Because you and I had both talked about how we've never had our actual bodies contoured or morphed in an online photo, but I've had my skin, smoothed out and my teeth brightened and like my space between my eyebrow like highlighted, using the After Effects tools. I've never had my face slimmed down or my arm trimmed off or any of that. But even just doing these little things with lighting effects, natural lighting first, and then going back in on Photoshop, it's unbelievable what you could do. And if you never sat there and watched someone do it to your own image, I think sometimes our view of what we're seeing of the materials that we're consuming is just so skewed. And no wonder we feel so depressed maybe about what we look like. We're starting to strive for something that's just, it's like the model doesn't even look like the model.
Well, I think that's just it. I think that people don't realize how much things like even just lighting will make you look more or less muscular. Like,
right.
Or if you're like in a pose holding on to something and you're in tension, whether you're purposefully trying to generate tension to look muscular or the thing is just like creating tension, the body in tension is going to look in a photo with lighting and all that and contour angles and all of that, even without being doctored, is going to look very different than the same body at rest in real life.
Right.
And I just think this thing happens where we end up consciously or subconsciously comparing ourselves to these photos of these people. And it's just like none of it, even if there's nothing nefarious going on, I think it's so important to remind ourselves that none of it is real.
Also because it's a static shot. And I mean, maybe these people do look like, wow, I've seen them in the new gym here. And some of these people, I'm like, holy crap, like you're in here 7 times. Every time I'm in here, you're in here.
They never leave. They never leave.
And I'm like, they're putting in the work, but when they go to pick up the weights, the belly hangs out, and then they kind of like get back into position and they can tighten it all, and then it looks really good for a second, and then they bend over and the belly comes out. Like that's natural. So if I took a picture of them when they're all ready and poised, okay, great. But if I took a picture of them when they're putting down the weights, like anyone would, it's like what anyway. But I think what's so interesting, back to this quote here, I'll read this out. So this was talking about, again, this supernatural phenomenon of where we're attracted to things that are kind of in the extreme. So organisms tend to show a preference for the stimulus properties, i.e. size, color, etc., that have evolved in nature. But when offered an artificial exaggerated stimulus, animals will show behavior in favor of the artificial stimulus over the naturally occurring stimulus. So a variety of organisms do this. Humans are not the only ones, but insects and birds specifically also share this trait of preferring the exaggerated version over what we know we can find in nature. So if you like these things that are like exaggerations of reality, I always think of the what was it? Roger Rabbit, the female in Roger Rabbit is like the perfect exaggeration, right? Like big breasts, so much hair, so much lips, the eyelids so big, tiny little waist, right? And Roger Rabbit's eyes are like gazooga every time. It's like that is within our biology somewhere and within our psychology somewhere to naturally prefer some of these exaggerations, which I think is just hilarious.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this is where, again, it's actually a quite nuanced conversation, which is like, if you want to do some of those augmentations or highlight those traits, whether it's with fake eyelashes or like plastic surgery or whatever, like, great. Like you do you. I am all for body autonomy. I'm not here for judgment. But I think the problem is, particularly in the health and fitness space, is that because we prop those things up, we start talking about that and looking at that and going, that is health. And I'm like, That is not health. That is not health markers. That has nothing to do with health. That's a completely different conversation. But we look at it and we go, oh, that's health. And then we assign those people authority. And then you can be that exaggerated version of a fitness body and know what you're talking about. But I have to say, having been someone who spends way too much time on Instagram, who people love to send me these like things that people are posting, they're like, will you do a reel on this? A lot of these people who are like these weird, like exaggerated versions of like what quote unquote fitness aesthetics look like are being handed authority and they don't know what they're talking about.
Yes. That's where things become problematic. So it's like, one, it is probably somewhere natural in our pop psychology to to be attracted to these things that are exaggerations of reality. The trouble becomes like what you just said, when we decide that the people who have those either natural or artificially obtained traits are now the authorities on what everyone else's health and fitness should be. That's where things get really sticky. So it's like a pure example. If someone is losing weight, we're like, oh, good, you're losing weight. Therefore, if you lose even more weight, you're even better. You're the best. Look at how amazing you're doing. And you've told stories about how you've gotten so many more compliments when you're losing weight, even though you're like, I'm falling apart on the inside. My favorite story is a family friend of ours. The group hadn't seen him in a long time. They met up for the first time. They're like, oh my God, dude, you look amazing. You've lost like 40 pounds. Good for you. What have you been doing? Turns to them and he goes, I have 4th stage cancer. So it's like these, the context of what we're doing. It's again, exaggerations get praised and then you turn into authority figures.
Yeah. And it just gets more and more extreme. And it's super ingrained into our culture. And the example of this that popped up with like, this then turns into like these thought viruses was like one of the most recent reel I did at the time that we're recording this. This person's a figure competitor and she did this reel, right? You know, she's got skinny little waist, big fake boobs. She's in her 40s, whatever. She's got a weight loss story, but she did this whole reel about how if you do, basically you hold on to these little weight, you hold on to little weights or big weights and you basically do like standing side bends. She was like, if you do this, your waist is going to get bigger because hypertrophy. And I was like, I mean, she didn't know the word. She might know the word hypertrophy. Her reel was not that technical, let's be clear. And someone sent it to me and I made the mistake of like, cause it was reposted on like a giant fitness page, of looking at the dumpster fire comments section. And within even that comment section, there was one person who was like, well, it's not going to make your waist bigger. And I was like, great, you're on the right track. And then they said, but it will damage your spine. I was like, damn it, you've never heard of pain science. You're wrong. And then in the next comment, there was someone who was just like, this doesn't make sense. And then someone wrote under that, well, clearly you don't know what you're talking about because your waist is bigger than her waist. So obviously you've been training wrong. And then this is where I just go, for fuck's sake, like, okay, well, I'll do the reel on it. And then because I was feeling pretty salty, I literally put in there, I was like, look, I know I don't have hashtag abs, but I have an exercise science degree. Just because I don't have like the waist that some of you are after doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, here's the actual science. I'm not trying to science you to death, but like, just because someone who has the trait that you're after is saying the thing that you want to hear doesn't mean that what they're saying actually makes sense.
Right. And the comment of like, you can't have an opinion because you don't have the waist that they have. It's like, what? Like, if I understand that there's a way to say this person may be doing certain habits that got them to where they're at. So let's listen because maybe they have experience with those habits. The problem is we don't know if they have those habits. We don't know if they just have a genetically teeny tiny waist. And people don't know about things like where do the lowest ribs fall? Where does the top of your pelvis begin? If there's not much space in there, there's likely not going to be a very big hourglass shape that happens. Or maybe their hips are really wide set. We don't know. We don't get to look at this. We don't know where your liver is located relative to your stomach. Like, we don't get to see this on people. How many feet of digestive tract do you have? We don't get to see that. So the funnier part, I think, after you posted that, is that this individual who was being put on this pedestal also clearly displayed signs that they were losing their hair. And we don't know about what's going on there, right? And it's not The point is not to look at that person and go, oh, because they're losing their hair, you can't listen to them. But it is highly correlated that people who tend to do very restricted eating tend to deal with, we'll just put it under an umbrella. We don't know why, but probably stuff like thyroid, et cetera. They're restricting in a very hardcore way that puts stress on the body. And stress on the body leads to things like hair loss. So we don't know. We don't know this person's full backstory. So I'm not here to be like, haha, don't look at them. But again, we're so obsessed with the tiny waist that we're not now looking at the comprehensive picture of health. And maybe people don't, this is the hard part. Maybe people don't care about that. Maybe they just want to look like the big red dot on the beak, right? They just want the feature that's going to make them more attractive. I don't know. And they'll do it at the expense of their global health, which I always find very interesting.
Yes. And I think then you have to come back to this idea of like, why, right? And I think that this is like the, I don't be like conspiracy theorists, the dark side of bodybuilding and aesthetics, right? Because not everyone who pursues things like bodybuilding and aesthetics has these issues or is doing it in this way, right? This conversation is much more broad and more nuanced, but there are a lot of people who now have engaged in the bodybuilding side of things who are coming out of it and saying, you know, when your hair starts, if you don't have an underlying condition, right? Like, let's say like PCOS can be associated with like the hair loss thing, and that's beyond your control. That's not from,
right.
That's not from doing like the extreme bodybuilder diet or extreme restriction. But it's like, if you previously didn't have an issue, let's say with hair, and you do extreme dieting for, you know, several years, and there's not an underlying medical condition related to it, and all your hair starts falling out, I think we can say that your health and fitness practices are no longer promoting health. Perhaps.
Yeah, strongly perhaps. But I think it would behoove, like, I think there's a few, I don't know your take on this. My take of I'm still trying to like dial down to what should be under the category of like, if we're trying to train people, like when we look at our pets, you have a dog, I have got 2 dogs and a cat. It's easy for me to see based on their coat, based on, you know, how much of their ribs are sticking out. I can look at that animal and go like, this is good health, this food is working for them, or this is not working for them. You know, it's like, it's so obvious when we look at our pets, like, hey, that's a healthy looking animal, that's a sick looking animal. Like, we need to go to the vet, something's off there. And I think the list that I have, it's a running list and I might not hit all of them, but it's things like hair is a really important indicator. You can see it in your animals. You can see it in your own, like how your hair is. And this isn't to be like, oh, you should be shamed for any of these things. These are just categories that I look at like, hey, these are probably good indicators of how things are functioning on the inside. Like hair is a good one. Nails, like if they're constantly, if the shape is changing, if you can't grow them, they're super brittle, that might give some indication about what's going on in terms of minerals. And again, might be a source for, hey, I should probably go talk to my doctor and get some blood work done if my nails like can't grow. Teeth health, apparently like cavities, etc. Those have a lot of indicators about what's happening on the inside. Dandruff is a big one that is, I didn't realize of how much dry, flaky skin, including the skin on your scalp. If you're living in high sympathetic tone for a long time, very stressed, dandruff is very common. And I've known when we finally moved over here to California from Arizona, it was like so terrible. I was like, oh my God, what is this? And then it resolved over time. So those are a few, like, you know, it's kind of like the old school pieces of like stick out your tongue, like are the cheek color, right? Those are some of the ones that I know I pay attention to for myself and my animals, to be like, hey, how are things going? Bowel movement quality, is that right? Like it's a weird one to talk about, but you know when your dog is not making the good poops, like we got a problem here. So same for humans.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with all of this, right, is that all of this exists on a spectrum. All of this is relative to you. All of this is there. Again, there's a strong genetic component in this with hair, right? Like I'm pretty sure I could I'm pretty sure that I could have like really, really wild health problems and I would still have, my hair would be fine. My hair is my hair is not I got lots of weak links. My hair is not my weak link, right? So it's like you would have to so I think we all have like various little weak links, but I think that looking for change is something. And I think that the other thing is like starting to have a more robust conversation around looking at someone's body composition, how much visible muscle do you have, is probably not a very good indicator or judgment of health. There's so much more context that goes into it. It's so relative to individual genetics. And I think that then that needs to be starting to lean into a conversation of like, okay, when we start talking about things that we might do to pursue aesthetics and fitness, right? And things we might do to pursue like actual changes in health and fitness markers. Yes, there can be a crossover. There can be a crossover in changing your diet. There can be a crossover in your strength training routine, right? You can see intersections of both on this Venn diagram, but they're not the same thing. And sometimes the things that elicit aesthetic changes that we correlate as making you look healthier you can do that in a very unhealthy way, such as like super restrictive disordered eating.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a question often of, again, if you want to go after some of these more aesthetic goals, I mean, that is a legitimate thing to do, like go for it. But I think some of the myth behind what's going on is it comes with like, it's important to keep eyes open about who we are listening to for that information, because I am personally working with someone who is a professional bodybuilder for nutrition consultation. And the hilarious thing I'm finding, this is not someone I normally would have sought out in the beginning. I always had this kind of, oh, well, if you're doing bodybuilding, it's extreme, da 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 da. Turns out this person is the wealth of information. And I'm laughing because this person has won bodybuilding competitions, in the natural category. I didn't realize there was a natural and a drug. You're allowed to use as many stimuli as you want. Really funny. But one of the things that struck me was like the most successful of the bodybuilders aren't even doing what we think they are doing. Most of them are like, it's going to take years for me to be able to get to this particular aesthetic that I'm looking for. The problem is that most of us in the mainstream are consuming the quick cycle of believing that you can get it done in 6 weeks, believing you can get it done in 12 weeks. And that's, I think, where some of the dangerous behavior starts to kick in, is like you want the beyond normal, the super stimulus, but you want it in a time frame that is like, even the bodybuilders don't do that. The successful ones, I'll say.
Right.
With long careers.
Totally. And then I think to add to that, I don't think people realize, even the bodybuilders who know what they're doing, there's a lot of, even if they're not doing it in a disordered way and they have it dialed into a place that like, they're like, because again, this goes back to like, is it for performance, right? Or recreational, right? If you're trying to like, I'd say if you're living your recreational body, right? You're not performing as a bodybuilder, right? It's kind of the difference between like running for health and general conditioning and then doing an ultra marathon. At that point, those bodybuilders are doing the ultra marathon of dieting. The stuff that they're doing it in a way that, yes, they're probably not going to end up in a total disordered state. They're doing it in as healthy of a cycle as they can, but it's kind of the equivalent of the ultra marathon of aesthetics. And the average person is not going to compete and should not try to compete in the ultra marathon of aesthetics. They're a recreational runner, which is why when they try to be an ultra marathoner, being a recreational runner, they fuck their shit up.
Right. Totally. It's like, we're going to try and pretend like we know what we're doing with gymnastics, and it's like, no, we have no idea. We have no idea. And the stuff that we think we know, because I think that's the fun part about the fitness world, is that because everyone has probably worked out in some way, it's hard because we go, I know how to work out. I know what to do. Oh, my brother works out. Oh, my sister works out. I know what to do. It's like, there's a very big difference between what recreational, like you're saying, what the recreational athlete does versus the professional individual. And usually the two things do not look very similar. Like most of the professional world, I say in quotation marks, is and the same thing in strength training world. Most of the gains and the achievements are happening in about a 70% exertion. And most people who are working in the recreational space that don't know that are trying to challenge themselves with this, I'm going to do things at 110%. And it's like, that's not what people do to get the results that you're looking for. So, yeah.
No, it's true. Everything takes place in a 28-day sprint. Why 28 days? Because, I want it now.
The moon,
right?
maybe.
Are we werewolves? It's like
the next full moon.
It's like some sort of magical transformation time period that doesn't make any sense at all. And then what they end up doing is, because they don't know what they're doing, is they just follow some random, really poorly thought out plan. They tank themselves, right? They just run themselves into the ground. And then they have to spend all of this time, like basically doing cleanup, whether cleanup is like, wow, I really messed up my relationship with food. Now I feel terrible. My hair is falling out. Oh, I'm super injured because I wasn't well prepared to do burpees in the first 5 minutes of workout every day, because that felt hard, but doesn't have anything to do with my physical goals. And it's a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, it's tough out there, right? Fitness on Instagram University and YouTube University. It's tough out there. It's like, what do people need to do that? It's like, I think the most important thing is, one, acknowledge that we are attracted to this like supernormal phenomena. Like that is a natural, and even if you're like, I don't subscribe to this. It's like, maybe somewhere in there you actually do. And what are the areas of where you're giving authority to people who look like the stimuli that you're most attracted to on any of these things? And maybe it's harmless, which is great, but maybe there's some areas where it's actually harmful. Two, being careful of what we look at in the media we consume. I mean, we talk about this over and over again, but it's so hard. It's hard to keep that, to remember like what is real, that photos are just a mini snapshot and you don't know the rest of the context of what was going on there. And if you haven't had a professional photo shoot done where they mess with you, do it. One, sometimes it gives you a little confidence boost. And then two, sometimes you can be like, oh my God, that's what they can do. So those are my two big things.
Yeah. And I think my big thing as we kind of wrap this is, rather than seeking out the person who has like the extreme version of the thing, is maybe consider working with someone who, they don't have to have had the same life experiences as you, but like treats you and the people around them as individuals with individual life experiences, individual cultures, individual challenges, individual issues. But also, if you're going to seek someone out, it's not that we all have to have had the same path, but it's like, I do think there's something to be said for someone who like understands, science and how the body works, but also maybe understands the nuances and the difficulties of the thing that you're having a challenge with. And this isn't a blanket statement, right? But it's the example of like, I listen to Maintenance Phase, and something that they point out, it's a podcast. They talk about a lot of like basically the bullshit diet trends, right? And one of the people on it, Aubrey Gordon, one of the co-hosts, is a fat advocate. And one of her like gripes is she's like, when thin people are like, I lost 10 pounds. And then they go to like someone who's much, much larger bodied. And they're like, I can tell you how to lose weight. You're just doing it wrong. And she's like, no, this person has no freaking clue what it's like to live in that body, have those challenges. And so it's like, if you have, that's one example. Another one is like, I'm hypermobile. I've met a lot of like super tight dude bros who have no idea what it's like to be a hypermobile chick. And so I'm not saying men can't work with hypermobile women or any of these things, but I think there's something to be said. It's like the Tom Brady diet comes to mind. Like, you're not Tom Brady. You're not a professional athlete, most likely. You don't have Tom Brady's life. You don't have Tom Brady's money. You don't have Tom Brady's genetics. Why are we all trying to fucking eat like Tom Brady? It doesn't make any sense.
You don't have his chef. You don't have his chef.
You know what I mean?
Tom Brady's life, if I had his chef, maybe. No, I don't think I could. I know. I think I'm hearing you, which is back. It's like, I think it brings up a point of like how to find a coach who, no matter what your goals are, again, it can be these aesthetic things. It can be the things like that you're chasing. It's fine. Go for it. Why not? It's a grand adventure to see whatever matters to you. But I think you're spot on. Like, first of all, if someone's like, I can help you lose weight, and you haven't asked them to help you, like, fuck that person. Like, seriously, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to be like, hey, everybody, like, don't do that. No, fucking don't do that. Like, stop it. Like, you have no idea. Nobody asked for you to help them. They didn't ask you to please coach me on how to like lose the same weight that you lost. So shut the fuck up. Okay. That's where I'm at today. It's a very sensitive topic for me right here. But I think finding a good coach is I only say this because I remember it's often said that people out there will say, well, you need to find a coach who has the body that you want. And I feel like that is such crap. It is such crap because that, especially in the case for women, because, okay, so you got pregnant and now you had a baby and you no longer look like what you used to look like 10 years ago. And now what are you supposed to do? Like, you can't be a coach anymore because you don't have the body that like someone who's 20 wants. It's just absurd. I'm only 35. So can I not work with a 70-year-old? Or maybe you can only work with me because you want a 35-year-old body. Like, what is this nonsense? The story I like about coaching, and this is going to be a little bit into the basketball world, which I'm not that deep into, but there is John Wooden was this old school UCLA basketball coach. He was considered like one of the greatest coaches. And the time that I was looking up John Wooden, like Kobe was like one of the best players in the NBA, right? And Kobe was like, he could do these things and he seemed to always be able to make certain shots. John Wooden was not going to be able to play professionally. He just wasn't actually that good. But the difference is he had to be so meticulous just to be at the level that he was playing. He made one of the best coaches because he's like, while I cannot do that blah, blah, blah layup, I understand how to bring baseline of where these athletes are, teach them how to put their socks and shoes on correctly so they don't get blisters, teach them like technique about their hands so they don't sprain their fingers and then get taken out of the game. So he knew all of these basic things that he had to struggle with. And that's what actually made him a good coach. So like, just because someone has a trim waist doesn't mean they know how to help anyone aside from themselves have that body. Doesn't mean it at all.
Yeah. And maybe they do, and maybe they don't, but I think that there's a benefit to some struggle, for better or worse, even though it's a real pain in the ass when you're living in the struggle, right? If it doesn't come easily to you, I think you tend to be forced to learn the process more deeply and more specifically because you have to struggle, and you know how hard it is, and you have empathy for everyone else who struggles with it. Right. And I also think it's just, I don't think it can be said enough how much genetics play a role in these things, especially when like, so I'm not saying that that you have no control and that you can't change things within your own body, but I do think that it's worth sort of looking at the genetic, the little genetic lottery that you have, because we all have some good genetic lottery things and some ones that we're not so fond of. And sort of being like, okay, like, again, realistically, is this thing that I'm chasing actually going to be possible? Because again, as someone like, I got a super short torso and really long legs. So if I'm like, I want to have an hourglass waist and I want to be able to do like the Britney Spears crop top look thing, the way that she does it. And also I want Kim Kardashian's ass. Like, I'm going to be very unhappy with my body. Not like I need, if I'm going to have to go find something to aspire to, I better go find someone with a short waist and a giant rack, because that's all I'm getting. That's it.
Yes, I will never be long and lean. I cannot grow more bone. My epiphyseal plate stopped growing. So my lever lungs are this, but it makes me really good at like push-ups. It makes me really good at deadlifts, things that involve shorter ranges. I'm great at those, but I will never have longer legs. I'll never have a longer wingspan.
I just think we need to be realistic about this. And it's the same thing. I shouldn't have body goals of someone who's an A cup. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like,
unless you're willing to go through augmentation surgeries, which, by all means.
So I just think that like, there's actually, again, this isn't like, I'm trying to crush all your body goals. But I do think that like, before we start going down these rabbit holes, if we're even going to do it, we do need to sort of like have a nice, like real talk with ourselves about like, chasing this might make me deeply unhappy, especially if the thing I'm chasing comes with a side of like the bigger beak syndrome. And I think it often does, right? Like the next time you find yourself like wanting this extreme version of like what something looks like, I just want you to imagine everyone walking around with giant beaks, because that's basically what we're doing.
Big red dots. This big red dot on my beak equals better.
Oh, goodness.
No matter how gargantuan it is.
No matter how ridiculous. Oh, I love it. So, I mean, we could go on forever about this, but any final thoughts, Isabelle?
I think we've got them all out there.
Cool. So for anyone who wants to connect with you, where can people find you?
Yeah. On Instagram, I am at stronger_human. And then my website is strongerhuman.com.
Perfect. I will link things in the show notes and in the YouTube description box. I'm not used to saying that anymore. That is a new one for me. And for anyone who joins us on YouTube, let us know if there's any other topics that you want us to cover or in the podcast in general, because Isabelle and I talk a lot. So it's easy for us to record these.
Thank you for letting me rant and use the F word.
Anytime. All right. We'll catch y'all later. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to my channel so you never miss an episode. Also, if you have a moment, please leave a rating and review on iTunes or share this with your friends. This helps other people find the podcast.